So in this part of our course, B01 Data Management, we're going to talk about data organization, data warehousing, and storage. So this kind of moves from the very simple level about file naming and folder organization strategies to think about backing up our data and disaster recovery, compression and encryption, and even more broadly how data organization can support accessibility and so on. So at the simple level, if you think about names, file names, we can think about in the same way for spreadsheets that there are some naming structures that are good and systematic, that they have identifiers of whatever nature that can indicate something about the data inside the file. Whereas if we have file names with spaces, different numbers, different lengths, symbols, that can create issues. So in the same way that uh, data in a spreadsheet should be machine readable, we should also consider that for file names, they should also be machine readable as well. So if you have files in our browser, we want to also structure them in the right way and have separate folders for, say, data, the raw data, and analyses, and also results, along with the metadata README file containing a data dictionary for each individual data set, and then also README containing information on the description of what is in each of these files and folders. So for example, you might have a data set containing folders containing information project management, and then the material methods that you're using, the data itself, the analyses that are completed, the figures that are generated, dissemination approaches, and then other things. If you go back to the RDM kit, you can also think about your tasks in relation to data organization and what's relevant. So if you click on your tasks, what it'll say is that there's a balance in the number of elements per name. They should be from the general to specific in terms of their importance of the names in the name, file name. Use known abbreviations that are established. Use underscores as better hyphens. Again, that can create issues later. Capitalized letters like camel space can also work too. Don't use special characters or spaces. Use a standardized date format. That can say apply for time as well. Unique identifiers, versioning. Also, you can also use leading zeros for sorting as well, and then also document this approach. So we can then think about how we store this data. So we'd have different for structured databases. You're used to relational databases, even if you didn't know the name. They have the data sets with known rows and columns, and then that allows us to use some sort of language to query that data, such as SQL or other things. Data warehouses are similar, but they're often integrating data from multiple sources and often can cope better with semi-structured data sets as well. In relation to semi-structured databases, we may also have NoSQL databases. So they can incorporate data in many formats, such as documents, key value formats, wide or tidy data, graphical formats, and so on. And then if we have this data spread across different databases, we can also think about how it's linked. So we can segment the data into separate components of that data set and use known identifiers that allow us to link between different data sets. So this could be gene ID here that links between the uniport ID to the gene ID in string. And that uniport ID is links to a tissue. So those identifiers can be linked across the different components. So these keys are important to uniquely identify rows and the primary keys, and can be used to link data sets. So that allows us to say track a gene expression at the corresponding mRNA isoform and the protein ID. That means you can keep your relation database you keep your data in a relation database with suitable hierarchies, as opposed to keeping all your data in drive folders, which is just going to ask for trouble if it's not structured in the right way. So a relational model is a database where it's an organized collection of structured data. So it might contain the tables, it may contain the columns containing the attributes or features or properties of that data. It have the rows, the domain, records, the primary and foreign key. may be queried with SQL or another queryable language. So if we're talking about attributes, what's referring to are referring to descriptors for the data set. So you might have a student ID, the first name, last name, date of birth, and their degree subject. So these are like adjectives in a sentence. So you might have a uh, a red cat that and the red would be a property of that cat. Or you might have a gene name, and the gene has a particular sequence, but the name is an attribute of that gene. In the same way, we can create relationships between entities, so it's a mapping between them. So, for example, a gene may be linked to a set of isoforms, which may be linked to a set of peptides as well. In this instance, we can have employees assigned to projects. What we have here is kind of one entity here, another here, and then an arrow kind of linking them together and describing their relationship. So that kind of depends on the complexity that's at hand. It could be 1-to-1, it could be 1-to-10, or 1-to-many. Related to these relational databases are what I call interrelational diagrams, which you were probably familiar with in terms of flow chart describing your steps in analysis. And that's how it shows how project tasks and data sets are related to one another. And that can help identify ones that are creating issues or problems or are dependencies. And this is something that would be useful to set up at the start of a project. Related to this are what's called entity relationship diagrams. There's a visual representation of the entities and their relationship in a database, and it's used in database design to describe the structure. So you have to have the research ID, and then the name for the different researchers. So these are the entities which contain their different IDs, and each individual entity is an instance. And that allows us to query this table and extract any information in a reproducible manner. A more complex example is GenBank files where we have semi-structured database, but we should be able to still query, for example, what's the locus ID or what's the description to find out information about this particular sample. It's more complex when you talk about the genes and CDSs inside a GenBank file because they repeat several times and they contain different types of information and different levels of information at each one. Moving on from semi-structured to unstructured data, this object storage is very effective for unstructured data storage. So, for example, photos and videos and so on. So they're kind of a flat, non-hierarchical address space where each object has an identifier. So you're actually, when you look at your photo on your phone is retrieving the identifier for that photo rather than the photo itself. Alternative to object storage is file storage, where this is where the data is stored as files within an hierarchical directory structure. When we do this are things like databases or data commons, which are cloud-based platforms allowing the community to manage and analyze data. So it's not just a database, but allows you to do analysis. So we can distinguish between data repositories that typically allow data downloads, maybe curation or harmonization, from data commons that allow analysis to be conducted. And that's different from a virtual research environment where which are designed for analysis. So these data commons can be quite complicated, which is why we need to think about roles of ourselves as data scientists within this kind of wider data lake and how we need engineers to be able to arrange this data in a useful manner that is stored efficiently, but is not something that we're going to swim in the lake and drown in the amount of data that's there. So we can compare this kind of wider data mesh as a data ecosystem, which is a set of data commons with other cloud-based tools or databases. So if you're using different databases for analysis, then you're actually using data commons, and this is part of the data ecosystem. These may contain relational databases, but may contain other databases as well, particularly data lakes, which allows better analysis of semi-structured and unstructured data. In contrast, at the Institute, many people use the N drive, which can support anything which is dangerous, but it should only be used for small scale data rather than large scale data. So we should note that and try to use external repositories wherever possible. So that concludes this video.